That night was the strangest and most exhilarating night of my life. The incident occurred on a calm Friday. I lay on my back, looking at the thin patterns of moonlight on the ceiling, my mind confused and restless. I was lonely since my husband Henry was on a business trip for the next 2 months, and I hadn't seen him in 3 weeks. The quiet creak of the door broke through the calm, and I knew I wasn't alone. I sat up slowly, looking at the dim form at the doorway. My 19-year-old son, Alex, stood there, his wide shoulders emphasized by the hallway's low lighting. He paused, one hand grabbing the doorframe as if it were the only thing holding him up. "Mom," he replied slowly, his voice tinged with apprehension. I massaged my eyes, my heart already clenching at the sound of his words. "Alex, what's wrong?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood still, his shadow cast over the room. Finally, he walked into his bare feet, creating soft. The way he walked against the carpet, cautious and seemingly terrified, made the air in the room feel heavier. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at the clock on my nightstand. To 14 a.m. Alex wasn't the sort to wake me up unless something bothered him. My chest constricted as I threw my legs over the edge of the bed, gesturing for him to go closer. "What's happening?" I asked softly. He paused again before sitting on the edge of the bed, his posture rigid and his hands firmly gripped in his lap. I watched him wait for a bit, but his eyes remained focused on the floor. The stress emanating from him was almost tangible. "Alex, you can talk to me," I murmured quietly. "Whatever it is, I am here." He took a nervous breath, fumbling with the hem of his t-shirt. "It's difficult to describe," he said. "Finally, I've felt something. I've been feeling strange, and I'm not sure what to do about it." His comments sent a shiver of discomfort through me. I leaned forward slightly, my voice firm despite the knot building in my gut, unlike the way he gazed at me. Then his eyes locked on mine with an intensity I wasn't expecting. "It's about someone," he said. "Someone I have been thinking a lot about. Someone from whom you would not expect relief momentarily flashed across my mind. Perhaps this was about a girl in school, a crush." He wasn't sure how to handle it. Alex had always been reserved about his emotions, keeping them bottled up until they threatened to erupt. "Okay," I said, giving him a comforting grin. "Who is it?" "Someone from school." He shook his head swiftly, and his eyes dropped again. "No," he said, his voice barely audible. I touched softly, but it wasn't someone from school, and a peculiar discomfort crept into my chest. "Alex, tell me whatever it is, and we'll sort it out." He took a long breath, his chest rising and falling as he gathered all of his courage. When he spoke again, his voice trembled. "It's you, Mother," he said. "Finally, it has always been you." The words struck me like a tidal wave, removing breath from my lungs for a minute. I could not talk, couldn't think. My mind rushed to make sense of what he'd just said, but the sheer weight of it had me reeling. "Alex," my voice started to falter. "What are you saying?" He rose quickly and began pacing the room like a trapped beast. His hands went through his hair, plucking at the strands as if attempting to physically extract the words from his thoughts. "I understand how that sounds," he said swiftly. "I know what I'm doing is terrible, but I can't stop myself. I have tried. I've tried for so long to push it away and ignore it, but it's always there." I gazed at him, my pulse thumping so hard that I could scarcely hear his words. "Alex, don't tell me that this isn't genuine." I understand how he felt when his voice broke. I have never felt this way about anybody else. It is not merely adoration or a silly infatuation. It's something far deeper. "Mom, Alex," I repeated again, my voice quivering. "You're my son, and what you're feeling isn't love. It's something else. Something. This is love," he yelled, his voice hoarse with passion. "You're everything to me, Mom. You're the only one who's ever understood me. The only person who has ever made me feel worth anything. How could this not be love?" My eyes welled up with tears as I attempted to understand what he had said. My kid, the wonderful youngster I had reared and loved completely, was expressing his sentiments. I couldn't comprehend sentiments I couldn't return, yet something within me was delighted right now. I think back on it. I don't believe I noticed it yet. I believe I attempted to ignore it, And so I said, "Alex, you're confused. You're going through a lot right now, and you may be experiencing these sensations." "I'm not confused," he said. He turned to face me, his eyes wet with unshed tears. His jaw set with such intensity that my chest ached. I have never been more certain about anything in my life. That's when I spotted it. I could sense his attraction to me, and I didn't want to ignore it. But nonetheless, I am his mother. I accepted responsibility for ignoring it. I stretched out and placed a hand on his arm. "Alex," I responded softly, "these feelings will pass. I assure you that they will pass. And when they do, you will see things more clearly." "What if they don't?" he muttered, his voice cracking. "What if this is who I am? What if this is how I am intended to feel?" My throat clenched, and I was unable to speak for a brief period. I didn't have the answers he was looking for, and I had no idea how to soothe the agony in his eyes. All I could do was hold out hope that time would provide clarity, and that this event would not define us. "You are not alone in this," I said, finally. My voice trembled but adamant. "We'll make it through." "Alex." United. He gazed at me for a long time. His eyes were filled with vulnerability, which made my heart hurt. "I don't want to lose you, Mother." He spoke it quietly. "I cannot lose you." "You will not," I exclaimed, forcefully grasping his arm. "Whatever happens, I will always be here. Why don't you join me tonight? Maybe it may help a little," I said. He nodded and took a hesitant step into the bed as I turned back beneath my blankets. Then I grabbed him, and I felt something. I didn't tell him, of course, so I just murmured, "Good night, honey," and he smiled at me. The stillness that followed was weighty but not unpleasant. It was the type of stillness that carried promises, delicate but genuine, and he closed his eyes. I sensed a glimpse of optimism. We hoped that we would be able to weather the storm, no matter how hard it looked. But deep down, I knew it was just the beginning, and I was correct. A night like this was coming up, and it would finish in a completely different manner. This night, nothing occurred, but there was more to come because love, particularly love as convoluted as this, does not dissipate gently. It demanded to be reckoned with, and I had no notion what that reckoning would be like. The morning following Alex's confession seemed unreal. The calm of the home, which was normally reassuring, pushed down on me like a stifling weight. Every corner, every familiar thing seemed to resonate with the unsaid tension between us. I kept myself occupied with housework, thinking that the routine would anchor me, but my hands shook as I folded the clothes, and my mind raced with thoughts. I couldn't say what this meant for us. For him? The clatter of a chair in the kitchen interrupted my thoughts. Alex sat at the table, peering into a bowl of cereal that seemed as untouched as my cup of coffee on the counter. His hair was disheveled. His eyes were shaded by tiredness. He hadn't slept, nor had I. "Morning," I replied carefully, breaking the stillness. He responded with an unfathomable face of grief. His voice gruff, I poured myself a new cup of coffee, the liquid filling the mug sounding louder than it should have. I joined him at the table, the space between us seeming both too distant and too near for a minute. Neither of us spoke. The air was dense with everything. Unsaid. Finally, I interrupted the stillness. "Alex, I meant what I said last night." He kept his voice calm despite the conflict in his eyes. I won't pretend I didn't. I closed my eyes momentarily, forcing myself to remain quiet. "I know you're being honest," I responded quietly. "But Alex, this is how you're feeling. We cannot take action on it. It is not something we should act upon." He leaned back in his chair, hands grabbing the table's edge. "Why not?" he questioned, his voice tinted with ire. "Irritation. Why does love have to adhere to rules and boundaries? Isn't love meant to be free?" I took a long breath, looking for the appropriate words. "Love is not simply about how we feel, Alex. I said it's about doing what's right and what's best for everyone concerned, and you're saying exactly that. It might harm both of us." He turned aside, his jaw stiffening. "I do not want to harm you," he said gently. "That is the last thing I want. I know I stated I was reaching across the table to lay my hand on his, and I don't want to harm you either. That's why we have to be cautious." We need to find a method to go over this." His fingers tightened around mine, and for a brief time, I saw the kid he used to be, the one who would hold my hand when he was terrified and turn to me for advice and comfort. But this was different. He looked at me differently now. "I'm not sure whether I can go over it," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, "but I'll try for you." Tears welled in my eyes, and I gently squeezed his hand. "That is all I want." The days that followed were a whirl of uncomfortable talks and imposed normality. Alex attempted to maintain his distance by going to his room or spending lengthy hours away from the home. I told myself it was better that the distance would help him work through his emotions. But I missed him. The easy rapport we'd had before everything had altered from the night, he admitted. We slept in the same bed every night, yet I still felt a gap between us. One evening I was making supper. I heard the front door open and shut. Alex entered the kitchen, his hair drenched from the rain. He gazed at me for a long time, as if debating whether to say something. "Hey," I remarked, attempting to preserve a pleasant tone. "You're just on time. Dinner is nearly ready." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped over to the counter and leaned on it, his arms crossed. "I've been thinking," he explained. Finally, I turned off the burner and faced him, my pulse racing. "What are we talking about?" "About us," he remarked, his eyes fixed on what I had spoken that night. I swallowed hard, bracing myself. I knew exactly what night he was talking about. "Of course. Alex. I thought we'd agreed." "I understand," he interrupted, "and I am not here to dispute. Justin, you need to say this." I nodded, motioning for him to continue. "I've been trying to find out how to deal with these sentiments," he said. His voice was low yet forceful, and I recognized something. "Mom, I don't want to lose what we have, even if it isn't what I want. I would rather have you as my mother than lose you totally." Relief flooded over me, but it was tempered by the grief in his voice. "Alex, you will not lose me," I said. "No matter what, I will always be there for you." He nodded, his lips squeezing together in a narrow line. "I know, but it's hard. It's really hard." I moved closer and placed my hand on his arm. I added softly, "It will take time, but you are strong. Alex and I will assist you get through this. However, I can." His eyes met mine, and for a brief time, the tension between us seemed to subside. "Thank you, Mama," he spoke softly. "This means a lot." We stood in the kitchen, the rain tapping on the windows, and for the first time in days, I felt like everything was going to be okay. However, life has a tendency of complicating everything when you least expect it, because just when I thought we'd reached some kind of calm, something occurred that threatened to upend all Alex and I had built, which had been frail but functioning for some time. He tried to grin more, laugh at my jokes, and join me for meals, like he used to. I clung to those times, hoping to persuade myself that things were better. However, late at night, when the home was quiet and I was alone with my thoughts, the weight of his confession remained. One evening, after a hard day at work, I discovered Alex in the living room. He sat on the sofa, looking blankly at the television. An old sitcom's laugh track echoed strangely in the otherwise silent room. He glanced up as I went in, his face inscrutable. "You're all right?" I inquired while seated near him, and he shrugged. "Yeah," I guess I hesitated. Before speaking about anything in particular, he let out a faint chuckle that was devoid of humor. "When aren't I thinking about this?" My stomach turned. "Alex, I thought we were getting over this." "I'm trying," he said swiftly, "but it's not that easy. You cannot just turn off emotions like a switch." "I understand." I said it softly, "and I don't expect you to, but we need to keep working on this for both of our sakes." He turned to face me, his eyes seeking for mine. "Have you ever considered it?" he inquired, his voice low, about us, and what it would be like if things were different. I paused at his query, which caught me off guard. "Alex, don't lie to me." He spoke in an appealing rather than a commanding tone. "Please tell me the truth." I turned aside, my mind racing. The reality was convoluted, entangled in feelings I didn't entirely comprehend. Of course, I had thought about it. How could I not, given what he had said? But admitting such feelings, even to myself, seemed like crossing a line that I couldn't undo. It doesn't matter what I thought, I said. Finally, I forced my voice to be steady. What counts is what you do. He groaned, ran his hand through his hair, and said the proper thing, but his thesis was incorrect. I know you think so, but what if the answer is no? Alex? I answered forcefully, cutting him off. He gazed at me for a long time, as if there was no way we weren't going to have this talk. His look reflected a combination of irritation and melancholy. You are terrified, he added. Finally, yes, I acknowledge it, because this is about more than just you and me. It is about everything. We've constructed everything we're going to lose. But I was lying. I was afraid. He was correct about it, but for the wrong reason. I was afraid to tell him that for the last several days, I had also felt something. I was afraid to tell him he hadn't responded, and the stillness that ensued was terrible. Finally, he rose, his motions rigid and purposeful. I'm going for a stroll, he said. I'm heading toward the door. Alex. I started, but he had already left. The hours went slowly, and each minute seemed like an eternity. I sat at the window, watching the street, my anxiety increasing with each passing instant. Alex did not return. It wasn't until after midnight that I heard the door open. I ran to the doorway, relief coursing through me as I saw him enter inside, wet from the rain. Alex, where have you been? I asked, my voice shaking. Walking, he replied, shaking the water out of his hair. I got a towel from the bathroom and gave it to him. You are going to become ill. I expressed my concern regarding high displeasure. You can't just vanish like that. He groaned and ran the towel over his face. I needed to clear my mind, and it did help. I asked while crossing my arms. He glanced at me with dark, unfathomable eyes. Not really. Something in his tone made me hesitate. I moved closer and lowered my voice. Alex, we cannot go on like this. It's ripping us apart. I know he spoke just above a whisper, but I don't know how to stop. Maybe we need assistance. I recommended someone see a therapist, and his lips curled into a cruel sneer. You assume a therapist will understand this? They may, I remarked, though I wasn't sure I believed it, or at least assist us figure out how to proceed. He shook his head, and the towel dropped to the floor. No one can cure this mother. Nobody can affect how I feel. His words lingered in the air, thick and unwavering. I wanted to protest and tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't because deep down I knew he was correct. The worst part was that I hadn't informed him that I felt anything that night, and that I was the one lying to him to conceal my emotions for him as well. I was aware of this, but I chose to remain silent for the time being. The next several days were a flurry of avoidance and uncomfortable discussions. Alex attempted to behave normally, but the tension between us was evident. Every conversation seemed like I was walking a tightrope, and I couldn't stop worrying that something might crack. That item arrived one evening when we were cleaning up after supper. Alex had been abnormally silent throughout the day, his motions tight and precise. As I filled the dishwasher, he leaned against the counter, watching me. Mom, he whispered, breaking the stillness. I need to tell you something. I turned to face him, my pulse racing. What is it? I can't do this anymore, he said. His voice trembles. I can't keep pretending. Everything is good. Alex, we've discussed this. I started, but he shook his head. No, you don't understand, he said. His voice rose. I can't just turn off how I feel. I can't keep pretending. I'm okay when I'm not. So what do you want me to do? I said, my wrath boiling over. What do you want me to say? I don't know, he said. His voice cracked. Justin, you must see me to realize how much this is ripping me apart. I see you. I continued in a shaky voice. I see you every day, Alex, and it breaks my heart to see you like this. But I don't know how to fix it. He took a step closer. His gaze locked on me. You cannot repair it, he replied. But maybe we don't need to. I looked at him, my head whirling. Alex, what are you saying? He didn't respond. Instead, he bridged the gap between us, his fingers brushing against mine. My breath made the air between us electrified, but it only lasted a second. I moved back, severing the connection. No, I responded firmly, my voice quivering. We can't. His face collapsed, agony engraved into every line. "I apologize," he murmured before turning and walking away. I stood there, my pulse beating, the weight of what had just occurred slamming down on me because, no matter how much I tried to deny it, something within me had reacted to him, which worried me more than anything. I looked back on the evenings we had spent together the previous couple of nights. He had been caressing me more than usual, and I had discovered that I was also touching him more often. I believe he noticed, which is why he initiated the discussion. However, the days after that moment in the kitchen were like walking through a storm, unexpected and overpowering. Alex and I have avoided one another more than ever. When we did meet paths, the saint, illness between us spoke more than words ever could. I persuaded myself it was ideal that this space was just what we needed, but the fact was that every time I saw him, he would escape to his room. Every time I saw a flash of anguish in his eyes, it tore at me. I spent evenings rehearsing the incident over and over. The way he looked at me, the weight of his words, the way my heart had betrayed me in that tiny moment of connection. It wasn't right. However, rejecting the complexities of our emotions appeared to exacerbate the damage. One evening, while I sat in the living room, a book lay abandoned in my lap. Alex came in. He paused at the threshold, uncertain if he was welcome. His hair was disheveled, his look wary, and this was the time I had to confess. Simply tell him how I felt. "Alex." I eventually spoke, my voice softer than normal. He glanced up, attempting to keep his face neutral. "Hey," he said. "What's up?" He moved deeper into the room but did not sit, instead pacing slowly at the edge of the coffee table. "I wanted to chat," I replied, glanced at me momentarily before turning away again. "I know things have been difficult for both of us." He nodded, closed the book, and laid it aside. "But Mom, I don't want you to believe I don't care." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. "I know you care. I said that this is so difficult because no matter how much I try to let go or urge myself to go on, I can't." "Mom," he started, but I raised a hand. "Let me finish." I said that I've spent a lot of time trying to find out what's wrong with me and why I feel this way. But the more I think about it, the more I understand it is not bad to be in love, is it? Even if it violates the rules or causes others to be scared. I gulped hard as my own words struck a chord deep inside me. "Love is not bad," I carefully said, "but acting on it is, particularly when it may harm others we care about." He nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated the response, but wanted to hear it nevertheless. "I get that," he replied. "I do. But what should I do with these feelings? Bury them or pretend they don't exist?" "No," I eventually replied, shaking my head. "You don't have to pretend I need to confess anything, and I'm just telling you this to help you channel your emotions into something that will help you develop, rather than something that will hold you back." He fell into the chair opposite from me, his shoulders sagging. "That's easier said than done, Mom. But tell me what you need to confess." "Well, Alex," I murmured quietly, "and I believe you may have observed that over the previous couple of nights when we were sleeping together, he did not answer. Then, to my astonishment, he gave a small chuckle. "Your touches?" he inquired. "Of course I noticed, but I convinced myself that you did it to make me happy. To be honest, they just make me feel lost. They make me feel so near to what I desire while still being so far away that you don't get lost." I added, leaning closer. "You're just finding your way, and that's fine. It's part of growing up." He glanced at me, and his eyes filled with vulnerability, making my chest hurt. "I do not want to lose you, Mother," he murmured. "I cannot lose you. You will not." Whatever happened, I maintained my forceful tone of speech. "I am here, and that will never change." My heart was thumping high in my chest at the time, and he had no idea. I still hadn't informed him how I felt, and that those touches weren't only for his sake. They were also motivated by my deepest desires. So I determined not to let him come between us anymore. I needed to clear my mind and tell him how I felt. But let me finish what I was about to say. "Alex, those touches were not intended to make you feel wonderful," he said. "I did it because I, too, felt something. I confessed. I still feel something. Alex, I was afraid to tell you because I am your mother, and it is wrong. Our feelings for one other cannot be genuine, yet I can't deny them. He remained quiet for a time before leaning towards me and grasping my leg. "Alex," I replied, "we can't do it." "What about Dad?" "We can. No one needs to know," he said, but I could see doubt in his eyes. I leaned in and kissed him hard, but not for long. I knew we couldn't do it, and I knew he didn't know either, so I pushed him away. "Let's have a good night's rest and chat tomorrow, okay?" I replied, and he nodded, but we both sensed the tension was still there. We both went to the bathroom to wash our teeth and prepare ourselves for bed, while changing into my jammies. I smiled at him as he washed his face. For the last several weeks, I've gone to my bedroom and climbed into bed. We'd been sleeping together since the night of his confession, so it seemed natural for him to join me. He entered the room a few seconds later, but before he reached the bed, I opened the sheets so he could step in. As I indicated before, the stress had not subsided, so I said, "Let's just get some decent rest and then address everything tomorrow before Dad returns, okay?" He stated it seemed like he'd already accepted that nothing would happen, but I hadn't. Unfortunately, it is the case. I switched off the nightlight and said, "Good night, honey," turning away from him. "Good night, Mama." I could hear my head whirling for a few minutes, but it seemed like hours, and my thoughts were scattered. At one point, my foot brushed his leg on purpose, but also by mistake, and he didn't turn away before I realized it. I drew him closer to me. He grabbed my leg, so I turned around. I hesitated for a second. Then I let everything happen. I kissed him, and we went farther than that. I won't go into detail about what occurred, but I let go, and for a little minute, I felt alive. I could forget about everything that had bothered me in the previous several weeks. I closed my eyes and allowed the moment wash over me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. This wasn't inaccurate, nor was it perplexing. It was genuine love, and it was the type of love that had evolved organically between us, the result of years of care, trust, and understanding. That's what I told myself while we were working, but it began and finished quickly. I suppose it was too stimulating for him. I suppose Alex grinned at me as he pulled back. "We're okay, right?" I nodded and made my way to the restroom. The following several weeks were better and easy. Even Alex appeared more at ease. But there were still occasions when our tension returned. His father had returned, so he began spending more time outdoors, hanging out with friends, and even resuming some of the activities he had abandoned. Within the previous us year, I immersed myself into my routines, seeking comfort in the simple, regular duties that kept life going. But as much as I wanted to think we were mending, the undercurrent of what had happened between us persisted. It was an unseen thread that bound us together in ways we couldn't totally escape. Up to this point, I still haven't informed my husband what occurred, and Alex and I haven't discussed it either. I'm not sure what to do or think about it. What are your opinions on this? I'm wondering about other people's perspectives on this, which is why I'm sharing this tale. It's unbelievable what occurred, yet I can't deny it. On top of that, I can never undo anything.